weeks as of tomorrow, status posts initial splinting for his left small mallet fracture. He now returns for serial splint change. We are actually videoing this process so that people might see how to do it and be able to change the splint on their own at home with the assistance of another. And the reason I say that is I do not believe you could actually change the splint on your own and do what is important, which is to maintain extension of the end joint. We call that the DIP joint. Because if you were to take the splint off and allow the finger to droop down, it would pull away the fracture, or if it was just a tendon injury, tear the tendon and start the whole process over. So it's critical that the finger be kept in extension at all times. So I am now removing the splint that we placed here a week or two ago, and I'm being very cautious to cut along the side and make certain that I'm not cutting his finger. I think he'd let me know if I were. But now we make the cut, and I can hold the finger in extension while I'm carefully removing the tape. Oops, I'm dictating this too. While I'm holding the finger in full extension. So now we have the splint removed. You can see that he has a little bit of maceration over the back of the finger, meaning it's been a little bit moist from sweat or the like. But now we need to keep the finger straight, and in the process he will take his other finger and hold that joint completely straight, and I will then be able to clean him off with the alcohol swab here, like so.
Nice fingernail.
Yeah, it does look okay. You could try to trim it if you would like.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
So we clean him off. Probably the next visit we will want to cut that fingernail back a little bit. We'll clean off his finger, dry it off a little bit, and then I will fashion, a replacement splint here. Which we measure and then cut. So you can cut through this aluminum material like so. And I usually cut off both ends and then trim back the corners, just actually cutting across the corner at a 45-degree angle so that it's not a sharp point. And then we want to bend the splint so that it applies or maintains hyperextension. We want the joint to be a little bit hyperextended like that instead of allowing it to droop. Because if it droops down, as I mentioned, it would pull the fragment away or tear the tendon or a combination thereof. So I'm bending the splint. But one of the problems with the splint is if you have too much pressure directly over that tender area where there's a fracture, it can cause an ulcer in the skin. So we are going to recess the padding over that particular area just slightly, just enough to relieve any pressure that may be over that fragment. So hopefully I recessed it in the right location. And then we make sure it's going to be a good fit, and that does look about right. And then before we put it on, we prepare, typically it's 3 strips of tape.
What kind of tape is that?
This is called Elasticon. It's made by Johnson & Johnson. It is a cloth tape that I really like for this purpose. It is very rigid and supports the finger quite well, and kind of is cast-like after a week or so, as you saw when I was cutting it off initially. It's a very rigid structure, and it does protect it. You could use regular adhesive tape if you wanted, but I was taught to use this and prefer it. So now we're going to place the splint over the back of his finger, and I'm going to take over. He doesn't want to let go because he's paranoid I'm not going to hold it, but I got it. And so you can hold the finger straight, applying pressure on the back of the splint to maintain extension, and then we place, typically I put the back or proximal end of the tape on first, and then bring that around and make it relatively snug, but not too tight. If you make it too tight, it will have a tourniquet effect and cut off the venous outflow, and his finger will turn blue. But you do want it to be a little bit snug, because if it's not on the snug side today, it will stretch out. The tape will tend to stretch a little bit. The padding collapses a little bit, and in some cases the swelling goes down, and that leads to it being loose. So if it's not a little bit tight on day one, it'll likely be a little bit too loose on day 2 or 3. So we do want it to be a little bit snug. So now we have his finger with the splint on. I'm probably going to add one more piece just for good measure across the middle. This may be overkill, but right there it looks to me like it needed another piece. So now he has his finger in extension. Can you show a side view? See, we've got it bent so it's a little bit hyperextended, and it should be holding that completely straight to protect the fracture. Now we also want to allow flexion of the next joint. This is the DIP joint. We want to allow flexion of the PIP, the proximal interphalangeal joint. And as you see here, my tape came a little bit too far proximal, so it's in that crease, and that will obstruct flexion. So I'm going to just dart it a little bit, just a little cut there. And by so doing, it should enable him to bend it a little bit better. Did I release it enough, you think?
I can bend it.
Okay. So that's how we change the splint, and unfortunately this is a frustrating injury because the splint, in my opinion, needs to be worn for 12 weeks. Many people protect them only for 6 to 8 weeks, but it's been my experience that you really need 12 weeks to know for sure that you caught all the outliers. Maybe overkill, but it seems to work well in my hands. And it does need to be changed at least every 10 days or so, because as you saw, just natural sweating will cause that skin to be macerated, so it needs to be changed at least every 10 days, and I really prefer weekly. I also warn my patients to watch for the color of their finger. If it really seems to be throbbing and hurting, then they need to elevate their hand, hand higher than elbow, elbow higher than shoulder. If that does not take care of it, then I would allow them to release each piece of tape until they find the one that's too tight, and that should take care of the problem. If it's really a problem and they're miserable, then they should call us and come back in. So, I think that concludes our presentation. There you have it.
Thank you.
We have hopefully a happy camper, and we'll see if it works.
It feels much better, Dr. Ellis.
That's good.